This is Spiritual Mamas Podcast. We're a couple of mamas out here just trying to raise kids, make it through a work day, and navigate mental health issues, all while going through a spiritual awakening. And we thought we'd take you with us. So grab your favorite cozy drink and let's chat.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Aericka.
And I'm Kim.
And this is Spiritual Mamas Podcast.
Welcome, welcome.
So, what's new? What's happening? What's the news?
You know, not a lot. This is kind of, I'm okay with the chill trend.
Yeah. I feel it's just interesting with like all this work that we've been doing and like all the research that we've been doing and like the last episode, 2 episodes ago was the winter solstice. If you didn't listen to that one, you really should, because it's going to change your opinion on the winter.
Yes.
And so that like really energized me and I'm kind of super excited. So again, go listen to that one. It was like 2 episodes ago, I think.
Yeah, by the time you're
out.
listening to this, if you're listening to them in order.
Yeah. But there's one about winter solstice. Go listen. It'll change your opinion on winter, because we're currently in winter, and usually not my favorite time of year, because I don't like the cold. I don't like the darkness. Like,
yes.
I'm not a fan.
I agree. And I think I was having a conversation with somebody the other day about winter, and they were saying how much they love winter. And it's like, oh, they love the snow and being cozy by the fire. And I'm like, that's postcard stuff. That's not real life stuff.
Yeah. Meanwhile, it's like slushy yuckiness outside.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, granted, I live in a city and the person that I was talking to doesn't. So when the snow falls for them, it like stays perfectly intact and it's great. And I'm like, the second the snow falls here, somebody's driven over it. It's gross.
It's black.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But I think having a different perspective on winter in general, because of the winter solstice, it can help to kind of quell some of those unpleasant feelings.
Yeah, and like going like usually by like January, February, I'm like over it. So gonna keep it in my mind that, come back to this and maybe re-listen and be like, okay, this is a good thing. We're going to have spring around the corner and, that sort of thing. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, me too.
What you're probably not looking forward to is we are talking about like feminine energy.
Yeah.
And way back in like the first or second episode, we talked about how both of us feel that we've been in the masculine, like using masculine energy most of our lives, and the thought of like stepping into feminine energy really scared us or made us nervous or like made us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I want to know, like, for you, why do you think that is?
Having time to think about this every time you're like, hey, we're going to talk about this. I think that, and I don't remember if I had said this before, I grew up in like a family of women. Women ran the homes, they provided, they did things. Like the men in my family, the ones who were present, would financially provide, but that was the extent of what they did.
Yeah.
And everything else was handled by the woman. The raising of children, I am one of the oldest of, the cousins and stuff. And so it was like my responsibility to some extent to do the caretaking and babysitting and entertaining and making sure that everybody's safe. And because of that, not that I like resented it, but it was just like a chore. It's like, okay, so I have to be responsible for me and everybody else around me. And I think it's kind of like fed into some of the things that I have been trying to pull away from. Like if we're going on a vacation, I'm doing the planning. I'm putting together options and itineraries and making sure that everybody knows not just like, oh, this is what we're going to do to have fun, but this is what you need to know about where you're going, about money, about safety, about whatever. So it's just a lot of responsibility. And thinking about the feminine is scary because it's letting go of some of that control and responsibility. And having, at least in my mind, this softer approach, this more nurturing approach, which I am, as much of a caretaker as I am not very nurturing.
Yeah.
Like
I'm not either. So I would not say that I was a like warm and fuzzy. I don't think anyone has ever said, you know, Aericka, oh, she's so warm and fuzzy.
No.
Exact opposite, I'm sure.
Yeah, like if you've ever seen those memes of like somebody's crying and there's a person standing in the corner with a broom, like tapping them on the shoulder, like, hey, it's okay, it's okay. That's me. I feel that 100%. You're sick. I got you. I will bring you meds. I will bring you soup. I will, you know, make sure that you're gonna survive.
You're gonna survive.
That's what I can do.
You're like that's the extent. Yeah. So it's okay. That's interesting. So I kind of feel the same way, or did feel the same way. Part of it, I think, is very much like my personality is, I'm a go-getter. I would probably say, especially in my younger years, I had a very aggressive personality. I hope I've kind of toned that down a little bit, but I can take over a room. Like I can like run things, and it's kind of always been my personality. But also the way I was raised is I was the oldest, and I was the oldest daughter, one of the oldest like grandkids, one of the oldest cousins, you know, etc. And yeah, like you said, a lot fell on me, and I had much younger siblings. And so I became the caretaker, and I also had a lot of trouble with like my female parts, for a better word. I had really bad periods. They were very painful. And so I feel like I've always been riling against my femininity, partly because of that. And then just thinking that it's a more weak aspect of things.
Yeah.
Like if you're feminine, you're weak, which is so stupid. But a lot of that is societal. And the other thing is like, it probably took me until I was like 30 to realize that you could be smart and pretty at the same time. Because I kind of grew up with, why would you want to wear heels? Like, why would you want to wear makeup? Like, that's kind of frilly. That's not useful. People that do that aren't smart.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it was ever said that way. That was kind of the impression I got. So literally like 30. I remember like coming to that realization that I could be both pretty and strong and smart.
Yeah.
Why is that? That's just stupid revelation, but like it's such a thing. So I think a lot of what we're talking about is very societal. And I think it's kind of a lack of understanding what the masculine and feminine energies are. Yeah. At least from myself.
Yeah.
100%. So let's get into that. So the idea is that you have two kind of types of energy that you draw upon in your daily functions, in your daily life. And they have been referred to as feminine energy and masculine energy. I tried to find another way of explaining that, other words, and I was having trouble finding that. Like I was having trouble with that kind of research. The most I've seen is feminine referred to as yin, like in the Chinese culture, and masculine as yang. But also feminine as being and masculine as doing.
I like that idea, that description. I think, like everything you just said, like the stigma and societal constructs around feminine and masculine definitely impact how I view them.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to see that one is like being, one is doing, that's the type of energy that you want to, and why wouldn't those be in harmony and in balance?
Right. Yeah. So kind of a definition of this I've gotten is that energy, these different energies are archetypal concepts representing two complementary forces found in all individuals regardless of gender. These energies exist as a spectrum, and embracing a balance between them can promote harmony and personal growth. So I went on a journey to find out what feminine energy or yin or being energy is. And I will tell you, a lot of what I found, which was upsetting to me, was all wrapped around getting a guy to love you and getting a guy to like be obsessed with you, your sexuality, your sensuality, your what is it called? Something feminine. But like I was like, that's not what I'm going for. That's not the point. And it was very frustrating because literally, if you put in feminine energy on like YouTube or how to improve your feminine energy on YouTube, all those videos come up. All about sex, all about getting a guy to love you. How can you like command a room with your femininity? You know, it's like, ew. Because that, like, what is that? What I want?
Right.
Like, that's not my point.
Right. And there are probably people who are looking for that, and obviously the research is there, or whatever, the information's there, find it. But as you're saying that, it's reminding me that a lot of times when I've heard of like feminine and masculine, I also hear the idea of like twin flame, which I don't know much about, but from what I have heard, I'm not really interested in. Like, that's not what I'm going for in trying to develop myself more.
Yeah. So I think a little better definition. So we'll define masculine and we'll define feminine. So I'm going to say doing and being, but we understand what's going on. The doing action, like key traits, would be action, logic, structure, assertiveness, focus, very like rooted in planning and logic and getting ahead and that sort of thing. Think of people like that are goal-oriented, driven by purpose, very rational, analytical, linear thinking, protective and decisive. So, which is great. You need all those things lots of times, getting ahead in your career, raising kids, you have to have a lot of these things, but it's very kind of like doing, it's kind of like outgoing energy, if that makes sense. Whereas feminine energy or being energy is key traits are intuition, creativity, flowing, nurturing, and receptivity. A big one is that receptivity. Turning inward, like the being is much more of a turning inward, not like a hibernation or not like a withdrawal, but looking inward, and kind of going by what you need. And some of the qualities would be emotionally aware and empathetic, creative and expressive, imaginative, emphasis on connection, collaboration, adaptability, healing, compassion, that sort of thing. So that to me makes more sense. So you've got like the one energy, which is where you have to be outgoing and you have to be like driven and you have to be doing things. And then the opposite would be when you have to replenish and be more mindful of yourself and others and that sort of thing.
I like the points that you're highlighting, and I think what's coming to mind for me is the, again, like trying to find the balance between the two, but the things that you've described for that being energy is making me think of like wisdom and insight.
Absolutely.
And when you have and know how to use that wisdom and insight, then the doing energy can be directed better.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I kind of thought of when I started like doing this research is I thought of a tree. So think about a tree. You've got the roots, which ground a tree. They protect them from like falling over. They kind of outreach. They just, again, very grounding. They have the bark, which is very protective, and usually the trunk is very like stalwart, very strong, right? So that to me was a little bit more of the doing, the masculine energy. But also you have like the branches and the leaves that like flow with the wind. They go with the seasons. They grow, and some, you see where they go around something. They go around something, so they had to like flow around it. They had to change direction. They had to be fluid in order to do that. And it's not like in the tree there's not, oh, this is where it starts and this is where it stops, because even in the roots they have to have like ability to flow around something and change direction and be creative in how they survive. And then also nurturing in that they have things living in it and they provide shade. And that's kind of how I started to picture it. I don't know if that does that like make any sense to you?
It does, and that's a really like nice picture to think of. And it's, of course, you would find that in nature, but it's really just identifying all of the like intricacies that come with these types of energies, and how even in nature, of course, in nature they find a way to be very balanced and to flow together really well. But to be able to like pick those pieces apart a little bit for, my human brain.
So, excuse me, why we started kind of looking at this was part of our knowing that we want to nurture our intuition, and for a number of reasons, but we both realizing that we have intuitive abilities and we wanted to expand upon them. We wanted to do that. And one of the biggest ways is to go inward and do meditation and do like mindfulness and be more connected with ourselves. And I think I'm going to get to kind of how we do this a little bit better, but I think if you think about it, you actually do a lot of this stuff and you are connecting more to your feminine side than you think. We'll get there. So the idea is that you need this balance, right? Because like we just talked about. And what happens is you often have an overdominance of one or the other. And so some of that overdominance of that masculine or that doing energy is where you end up with rigidity, you end up with burnout, you end up with disconnection from emotions. And we see this again on a societal level where guys are, when we think of masculine energy, a lot of guys are go, go, go. They aren't connected to their emotions. They don't express them. They have like, they're just not as like easy flowing or easy going. And it can be a problem. The other thing is overdominance of feminine energy is where you have a lack of direction. You're very passive, feeling overwhelmed by emotions. And so we have to kind of figure out how to get these together.
Yeah, I can see how like having too much of one can be challenging or problematic. And what I think, at least from my experiences and what I've, come up in certain relationships, is I can see that like too much of that being energy can lead to like poor boundaries and like overstepping because you're trying to I can try to take care of people too much.
Yep.
So
I can the lack of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So have you ever heard of this, like, wounded? Like, wounded feminine, wounded masculine. Have you heard that?
I've heard those terms. I have no idea what they mean.
Yeah, me either. I was like, what does that even mean? Like, you hear about it all the time. Oh, wounded, this, that, and the other. So I, again, went down a rabbit hole about what does this mean? And it was kind of hard because a lot of what you saw was, oh, well, it's wounded. Okay, what does that mean? And then it would tell you, like, the traits, but it, like, wouldn't understand, like, how are you wounded? Like, what exactly does that word mean? And so basically, it's deep emotional scars and imbalances that can happen from past traumas, but also just kind of like growing up, like your past experiences. I don't think it necessarily has to be trauma. I think it has to be just how you grow up and how you've been raised and what you've seen and what you've heard. And some of that wounded feminine energy can manifest as fear of vulnerability, which looks like emotional withdrawal, avoiding intimacy, masking of the true self, self-blame and guilt. I'm sure you've seen people like that where they chronically just take the blame regardless of whether it's their fault or not, or say sorry all the time, or, try to overcompensate for people, even if it has nothing to do with them. Unhealthy relationship patterns, because you're not taking care of yourself. Struggling with receiving pleasure, inhibited creativity, comparison and envy. And then, like, what I thought was interesting, so you have, like, this emotional withdrawal, but you can also have over emotionality, but then emotional numbness, because you have such feeling that you're overwhelmed by the feeling, so you dissociate because you have poor coping or society or whatever. So
you're like naming all these things, and I'm like, check, 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 check.
Okay, so you're a little wounded.
So there's that. And I had this conversation the other day with somebody about specifically in relationships, whether it's romantic or family or friends or whatever, how we show up based on what our experiences are. And so if I'm meeting somebody for the first time and we are developing a friendship, they are showing up based on their experiences, which I have no idea about. I'm showing up based on mine, which they have no idea about. And if we can't learn how to communicate, then it may, depending on your level of understanding and work, it could create conflict. And in this particular conversation I was having, this person was essentially displaying like temper tantrums. And it's like, oh yeah, there's that piece of me that doesn't feel heard or seen. And so I am coming out this way with it. Like I'm yelling, I'm using, bad language or putting people down. And I wonder how much of this can kind of play into that. If you're having well-balanced doing and being energy, are you able to better express yourself and hold healthy boundaries and communicate well and engage in relationships in a meaningful way?
Yeah, absolutely. Because one isn't dominating the other. And recognizing those wounds and working on, working through those. And that goes back to like those limiting beliefs. It's kind of all plays into that. Then there's a wounded masculine, which here's what's interesting. So you could find a lot about wounded femininity, but when you go to the wounded masculine, the first thing that came up was, well, masculine energy isn't a thing, really. It's something that some people talk about, and it's not like not that it wasn't valid, but it's not real. And it was kind of like, that was so off-putting to me, because I was like, okay, so you're immediately telling men that they don't have a masculine energy, they just are. And there's nothing wrong with it. And part of it when it says wounded, it just kind of talks about traumas, but doesn't really talk about anything else. It was weird how the difference came off in the language with a lot of the articles I was coming up with, which I found so sad. Because as we know, in society, men are so like kind of pushed to the side when it comes to their emotions, comes to like them going inward, them looking at anything other than outwardly.
I think that also really just brings up how much there's like this expectation. For men, there's this expectation. They just are. You know, boys will be boys, and men are expected to be aggressive and to be, what's the word? Productive and like, you know, providers, and they just are. And there's no room for, you know, what that takes or what that means or how that impacts them or the people around them. Whereas for women, there's this, oh, you have to be nurturing and empathetic and understanding and open and vulnerable and da-da-da-da-da. Like it's clearly not balanced.
Right. Yeah. And another thing I found was that it's wounded masculine is often hard to recognize because it's masked by societal norms, like we just talked about, all the different things that men are supposedly supposed to do. But how it can manifest, what I did find, is aggression and overreactivity, quick temper, hyper independence, emotional inability, like very shut down, an emotionally charged situation, unable to be vulnerable, even when you go through something awful. There's nothing wrong with them. You know what I mean? Like there's not, I shouldn't say them, but people who have this wounded masculinity, there's nothing wrong. Like, oh no, I'm fine. Well, okay, we just went through this horrible thing. Like, don't you feel something? No. Okay. Hyper competitiveness. So like an excessive need to win or be the best, often at the detriment of well-being. And that leads to a feeling of being not enough. A fear of vulnerability, viewing it as a weakness, control issues, difficulty in trusting, and prioritizing others' needs over self, which I just checked off all of those. So apparently I have a wounded masculine. Especially in my younger years, and even when I'm saying younger, I mean like 10 years ago. Like I'm not talking like that far behind, but I can see this in myself. I can be aggressive. I have a quick temper. I can have overactivity for sure. Hyper independence, 100%. Like the thought of like depending on somebody was such a foreign and scary concept to me for the longest time. And like the hyper competitive. I wouldn't say I was hyper competitive, but like I always had to be the best, not over other people, but the best to me. Like I had to be the best because I had to be the best for me. Not that I had to beat other people, but I had to be the best of what I was doing. And if I didn't, that was that not enough feeling. And I didn't allow myself to fail at something. That, not okay. Cannot fail. I gave myself no grace to struggle with something.
I wonder if, and I don't know if you're going to get to this, but I wonder if, when I think about it from like a societal perspective or a psychological perspective, we often develop behaviors, thoughts, experiences based on, you know, those around us and what we've seen. Do you know if the idea of like a wounded masculine or a wounded feminine, if that's something that can be passed down?
Yeah. I mean, not like genetically, although there is theory on that like we have like generational trauma that does get passed down.
Yeah.
But I do believe, and I have seen like what I've read is that it goes by like generational. What you see, and what they do, you know, how it's presented, and you know what you're told and what you're taught, and you know, oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think that's interesting because at least for my individual experience, and we've talked about this before, this journey for me is so different than what my family is like accepting of.
Mm-hmm.
But I could definitely, as you're highlighting, these points, I can see some of these traits or some of these challenges in family members, in my parents specifically. Mm-hmm. And you and I have had conversations about like how you are very assertive and how you can advocate for yourself in an aggressive way, and how you've learned that from your own family. Yeah. So it's just like interesting to see how those things can be passed down from like an energy perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting how it makes, how it develops your energy and how it can kind of mismatch your energy. And like these traits aren't bad. Like the traits of being aggressive isn't necessarily bad, because you have to be that way in certain positions. You have to shut down your emotions in certain situations. It's the matter of it taking over your entire persona or taking over your entire life is kind of the issue. I can think of people in specific that are 100% like the wounded masculine, like 100%. But have to address that with that person. So how do we work on this? So it kind of goes with both. What I'm going to say kind of helps both, but it's more geared towards that feminine yin being energy. And again, so if you think about the feminine energy, it's kind of turning inward. It's just being, it's allowing. And how we do that is practicing mindfulness, which we've talked about before. And in this aspect, I think mindfulness in how you set boundaries, how you interact with other people, how you take what they're saying to you, how their interaction with you. I think that's kind of what you were saying, is their interaction with you, how you are mindful with how you take that in. Much more like how you are reacting and being and doing.
Yeah, I like that kind of distinction. And I think we've definitely talked about mindfulness before and how it can look traditionally. But when you're describing this, I think what's coming to mind for me is really being able to just be considerate, being considerate for yourself and for others.
Right.
Like what is this experience doing for everyone involved? Not just me.
Right. And not just them.
Yeah.
Like if you have a tendency to worry about other people, like also yourself. And a big one is that meditation piece, because it brings you inward and it brings you into that quiet space to then just allow feelings to happen, allow creativity to happen, allow calmness to happen. And it really, we talked about this in an episode, we've talked about this 100 times, but it's like one of the best things you can do for yourself in an all-around capacity. And to help balance your energy, this is one of the best things you can do. So, and then on top of that is that journaling piece. Journaling on your feelings, journaling on an experience, journaling on positivity, whatever the situation is. We've talked about intention before and how we both sometimes struggle with an intention. So this one would be a good thing. Like I want to connect with myself like that. I want to connect with my inner self, and that be the intention for all of these, like this mindfulness, the meditation, the journaling.
I've been recently thinking about intention because I have been using it in different ways lately. And I realize how much I have struggled to be like specific with my intentions. And sometimes my intentions are very, very generalized. And not that that's good, bad, or indifferent, but it is what it is. And so that I think I like the idea of trying to use intentionality in a very specific way for developing balance in the being and doing energies.
And again, I want to express that this is for both male-bodied people and female, or male and female people. Like this is not for, like, I'm not talking to just women right now. Like I am talking to people identified as male, and this is everybody. This oh my gosh, what am I trying to say? This balance is for everybody. And I can't express that enough. Like, I just want to go hug every guy. Like, I just want them to be able to feel that they can do this as well. Because yes, as a woman, you and I have struggled with this, but it's almost okay that we have struggled with it, because it's more, we're showing masculine traits. And so that's almost better. And I'm going to use huge air quotes on that. But for a guy to recognize that in themselves, as far as like the wounded feminine, is like, it's getting better, but it's hard. And I know it's so hard for men, and like it makes me just want to hug everybody because I just want everybody to feel good.
So if you see Aericka on the street,
I'm going to hug you.
Know that she's going to run up and hug you.
Okay, maybe not. I will get your consent first.
Good call.
Okay, maybe not. But anyway, back to it. The other one is therapy. Deal with these limiting beliefs, deal with these wounds, deal with these traumas, deal with these upbringings, work through them, and be able to recognize them. And I talked about this before. I didn't necessarily recognize a lot of my problems and wounds and whatever until really doing a lot of work on it.
There is so much that I could say and think about therapy. It can absolutely be so helpful. I have found that as a client, I've seen, I can't even tell you how many therapists. When I make the decision to go to therapy for something, I can go and get that thing worked on and be able to grow from it. And then I will end that relationship.
I've seen that.
Yeah. And then I go to somebody else when something else comes up. And I do research on like, okay, if I'm looking for this specific thing, who has like experience in that and whatever. And I appreciate all of the therapists that I've been to. That's something that I think works for me. As a therapist, I have seen clients for years, and it's like they're very comfortable with that one relationship, and that's perfectly fine too. I think it's really important for people to approach therapy with like an open slate, open lens. Let me be open to the experience. Maybe you're going to do better with one person. Maybe you're going to do better with one person for one specific thing. Maybe you're going to need different approaches. And that's all okay. But knowing that, whatever your goal is going into it can be really helpful.
Yeah. So I've had the same therapist for years, and that works for me. But the other piece to that is that you need to be able to, like you said, be open-minded, be open to what comes up, be open to like their suggestions, and doing the work. Like just saying something and then hearing something and then going home and not like doing anything about it. You got to do the work.
1,000 trillion billion %. Yes. And that's a conversation I've had on both ends, as a client and as a therapist. I've had therapists be like, really, like, what are you doing? You're saying you want to do something about this, but you're not doing it. And I've had to like look at myself there, and I've had to have that conversation of like, the work is not in this room. Like, this room, we have this 1 hour, this one time a week to process and figure out what you need, but you got to do the work outside of that room.
Yep, absolutely. Another way is connecting with a supportive community. And we've talked about doing like a women's circle. I actually have been toying with doing a men's circle. Not sure what that look at because I'm not a man. But it's something that I'm toying with that I think would be very helpful because you see women's circles a lot. You don't necessarily see men's circles. So just connecting with people that are in the same.
Yeah, I love that idea. That was actually one of the goals I wrote down for my goals for next year.
Nice.
Like being able to have more connection and community support.
And that can be having a friend. That could be a family member. That could be, like I said, going to a women's circle of people you don't even know. It could be going to a workshop. It could be going to the retreat. It doesn't have to be the same people that you are around. It just connecting with supportive community. It could be an online community, just finding your like-minded people and that are supportive. The biggest thing is that supportive piece. We talked about in tapping into the intuitive self. Kind of talked about that a lot. The other one is like creativity. And I am not good at this one because I don't feel I'm creative. I mean, I guess not in like a traditional sense. Like I can't paint, I can't like draw, I'm not necessarily a good singer. I don't write, you know what I mean? But that's not the point. The point is to tap into some sort of creativity. It could be coloring. It could be dancing around while you're doing the dishes. It just like that movement piece. That's kind of another one, but going for it, whether you feel you're good at it or not. The point is to allow that to happen. And that can come from journaling. Like maybe you can journal about that, stuff like that. So
yeah, I think I used to think I wasn't a creative person, and not that I am artistic, and I think that was the thing for me. I used to combine those things.
Yeah. Being
creative meant being artistic. I am not artistic. I am creative, and I enjoy being creative and not being great at it.
You got this one under wraps.
And that's like, you're saying some of these things, and I'm like, I love dancing. I'm not necessarily a great dancer, but I love doing that.
Yep.
Definitely with writing. I love to write. Also, not always great at, but something that I enjoy doing. So I think being able to just remove some of the expectation of what being creative is can help you to access it a little bit more and explore. It can be fun. It doesn't have to look one specific way. It doesn't need to be like an aesthetic or something that's packaged well for other people to consume, because it's about your self connecting with that.
It's for you.
Yeah,
absolutely. And again, you can go to workshops for that. You can go to retreats and they do stuff like that, where they do a creativity piece. Movement, like yoga is a big one, but again, dancing in your living room, walking, running, exercising. Those are all good ways to kind of just like, I think that's more with that fluidity piece to allow kind of like that motion piece that, and also kind of that calming piece. So, and kind of the last one I have is connecting to nature, which again, we've talked about before, but it can just really. So I had an interesting conversation with my shaman teacher, and there's a concept called Didiri. It's where you sit in nature and just be, and not with music, not with like expectation, but you could do it where you're just standing, looking out your window, looking out your window, or you could actually be like in nature and just listening to the sounds, listening to what you're seeing, what you see, smelling what you smell, like feeling what you feel, and just like really, it's kind of another form of meditation, but not necessarily where you're going inward, but you're connecting. So it's more of that connection to nature.
I like that. I think I can think of times where I've done that, not intentionally for like, increasing this being or feminine energy, but like I very much enjoy when it's raining to sit on my front porch and
Mm-hmm.
experience the rain. And that's an easy one for people to do. I would imagine just being able to like, I mean, maybe it's easy to just sit and experience. Maybe it's not easy to sit and experience, but
I mean,
it's something
if you
that's
live in New York City and you're sitting,
Yes.
you know, it's a
Yes.
little bit more difficult.
Yeah. But I think it might be a little bit more accessible to do things like connecting with nature in that way.
Mm-hmm. Versus like going on a big hike, like, you know, it being like a having to do it
Right.
situation.
Right. Definitely not so much of like the action piece. And I also think about like with meditation, there's the goal and expectation of having this specific type of experience, whereas what you're describing with connecting with nature doesn't have to have any sort of expectation or goal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a lot. What's your thoughts?
I think where I was at the beginning was very at the beginning. Where I've been since we've started to discuss this has been very like apprehensive, and now I am feeling like maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it's not so scary. Maybe it's not so difficult. It seems having that information really is like helpful to, it seems like it could be easier for me to identify maybe where some of my challenges are or where some of my imbalances may be. And doing any of these activities that you just mentioned are things that are easily accessible to me, and I can definitely use them with the purpose of, you know, increasing that energy.
Yeah, I mean, like I said at the beginning, like you're doing a lot of these things already, and you're not realizing that that's helping this like yin being feminine energy. So yeah, I think you could do it. Well, I'm glad that you don't feel so intimidated by it now, because the last time I brought this up, you had like such a visceral reaction to it. You're like, eh.
I know. My entire body tensed up, and it was like, oh my God. And maybe that's part of the challenge is like if I have a preconceived idea of something, which, I mean, almost always I'm going to have a preconceived idea because that's, you know, we live in the world. So when that happens, I can let that get in my way. And I need to be open to, well, let's explore. And that's part of the process anyway. So
yeah. When we first started this, I was afraid of feminine energy as well. Or like that feminine aspect. And kind of doing the research and then just doing the meditations and the work, the intuitive work has really brought a lot of that balance back for me, I feel like. Because I could say, oh, I 100% with that wounded masculine. I was like, oh, blah, 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 blah. But I feel that was slightly in the past. Obviously, I still have a lot of that, but I feel like it's like more balanced. Not that I'm perfect, but
yeah.
But it's something I've noticed.
Yeah. And I think with balance in general, there's this natural up and down that will happen anyway. So it's not about being perfect all of the time.
Right.
But being able to recognize when you're imbalanced and recognizing what you might need to do to get back into harmony.
Yep. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, because I really appreciate like the information and feeling better about approaching it now and working on it.
Yeah. Good. Yay. Well, that's all I have. But we'd like to ask everybody to follow us and rate us and send us some comments. We're on all the major platforms.
Yes.
And we also have an Instagram at, I mess it up every time, at spiritual_mamas_AK. Follow us on there.
Yes. Follow us everywhere. Leave us comments, leave us feedback, tell somebody.
Share.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, till next time.
We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.